his platoon went down there, or his platoon that came in with him. Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to hand over the reins of the presentation to my father, James Lane. Can you hear us, Dad?
Hi, how you guys doing?
Right.
Yeah, I hope it's not boring because the next part won't be. So, yeah. Jason and I worked on this, and I'm very proud to say I do this talk to a lot of veterans all over the country. I'm doing this one from home for the first time on our Zoom with our videographer. And I'll start back with it just so that you've seen a little bit of the highlights. Jason's given you the backgrounds of kind of the combat area that we did, the kind of 47 pounds of garbage we wore in very hot weather. So I'm going to start back and start from the very first day of the battle. I was a second lieutenant in the 2nd of the 7th. The battle that took place that's in the book was on the 1st of the 7th. There was no more 1st of the 7th to come in, and I was in an Eagle flight, which was put on, and they sent me up with 28 of my troops, all infantry soldiers. And we were the last reinforcements on the first day to come in and hit the ground. Now, when we hit the ground, they had already suffered about 3.5 hours of constant fire from the North Vietnamese. There was blood everywhere. There was dead guys everywhere. My troops were green as grass, and so was I as a second lieutenant. So I looked at it and I thought, well, we're here. I guess we're going to do something that is good, we hope. My Colonel Moore was the commander of the 1st of the 7th, not my commander. And they sent me in and they said, look, Lieutenant, you're the only Ranger in the group that's got a ready to go infantry group. We're going to put you in, and we managed to hit the ground. Well, before we hit the ground, we didn't realize that hitting the ground was 4 feet from getting the helicopter on the ground. So the helicopter pilot, who was an excellent pilot, told me, he said, Lieutenant, when I get to 4, unass. That meant, excuse me, ladies, that meant get out of this thing because we're going to be moving on. So when we started into the elephant grass, the one thing that was very obvious is the elephant grass was about 5 feet high. The Vietnamese soldiers were about 5'4". We were about 6 feet. So we were pretty obvious once we got out of the helicopter if we didn't bend over and lean out. The last flight that came in on X-ray was mine. The fighting had gone on. A lot of casualties had been already taken because of surprise. We did not surprise them. The Army used a new technique called search and destroy. That's like hide and go seek. The search and destroy was, we think they're here, and if we find them, we'll fight them. Well, that's not a very good way to fight a war, and it was not a good way in our advantage. So what happened is, by the time we got to the ground and I could not move, I had 28 guys that are looking at me like, what do we do, Lieutenant? And I said, put your head down on the ground. Don't get up. Anybody that was up about 1.5 feet out of the grass was getting shot in the shoulders and the head, and they were falling left and right. So we, as a reimbursement of 28 soldiers, they're saying, okay, whatever the lieutenant says, we do. Okay. And so I thank God and said, you know what? Give me some wisdom to do something right here, because this is serious. Going into the last troop and during the night, we started our first time, actually 3 months in country. It's the first time I'd ever fired my weapon. I'd been on other patrols and sightings that we went to, and I looked out and I thought, okay, here we go. When nightfall fell, we started something that was going to be the most impacting thing of my life. We realized that 2 things: the Vietnamese soldiers, the PAVN soldiers, they did not take prisoners. Everybody died. if you were on the ground and you were wounded, you got a shot. And we do just the opposite. You look to your left or your right, and you looked at your buddy and you say, you know, hey, we got to get him back to the medevac area. Well, the minute you get up and expose yourself to the medevac area, you're a target. And that was happening to my guys. I said, do not under any circumstances get up. Stay in this elephant grass. So we stayed in the elephant grass at the position that I was in most of the night. Now, the night I put down on a note says combat. All night fighting took place. Sadly to say, a lot of it was called what the Army now called close encounter. That means shooting somebody point blank. And we had hand-to-hand combat, which meant you were fighting with a knife. And very few of us had a knife. I happened to be guided by some special forces guys, and I have a knife that I carry. I've got it right here next to me. If you can look at it, it's a Randall. It's very, very sharp. It's designed for killing purposes. And this is what I carried. And I have to, with myself and 28 guys, I'm the only one that had one of these. So you can imagine the feeling of what's next. And I'll tell you what's next, because all night long fighting went on. Realized that the Vietnamese were much smarter than we'd given them credit for. They had surrounded our LZ. So I couldn't get over to Company C from the 1st to the 7th because we were surrounded. We were afraid to shoot. We were afraid to get noise because we might be shooting each other. So it was a quagmire that was just beyond comprehension of what was going on. All night long, this went on. And it's more and more. Any of our soldiers that were already wounded and were on the ground, the North Vietnamese had similar knives like this, and all they did was crawl across the ground, get in the grass, and knife them. So we're losing a lot of boys. And most of us had never had, I was well trained as an Army Ranger. And I thought, well, I never thought in my life I'd be fighting in the jungles of Vietnam with a knife instead of a AR-16. So to make it a brief about the 14th was a hell of a day. We lost lots and lots of guys. We lost five lieutenants. 3 of them were classmates of mine. So they were dead. And so consequently, we had companies out there that were being run by sergeants that did not have a clue what to do as a company commander. I told my guys, I said, look, stay down, stay with me, go where I go, and I'll tell you how I think we're going to get out of here. And I prayed heavily. So on the morning of the 15th, we made it through the night. I actually made it through the night without losing a man. I had a couple of guys wounded, but I did not lose a soldier. And my guys were saying, what's next? Well, the next day, I put a note down at 6:30 in the morning. Light came, and the North Vietnamese decided to do what they call an annihilation attack. That means overwhelm your enemy in any way coming in that you can. And they outnumbered us in the Ia Drang. They outnumbered us about 13-1. So it wasn't exactly a fair fight. They were doing their job. We were trying to do ours. And we didn't really know what it was we were supposed to be doing other than shooting back. Well, when you've been shooting back for 2 days, a day at heavy combat, and the next day you run out of ammunition. And you start 2 things that burden you in Vietnam. You run out of ammunition, you run out of water. We didn't have either. So we couldn't get helicopters in to reinforce our troops, and we couldn't get ammunition. So I happened to carry under my jacket, I carried a 9mm that was not Army issue. So I took the 9mm and I said, I'm out of shells. We picked up some enemy equipment, but being an AK-47 makes a very distinct sound of any of you that hunt or shoot. And you realize you couldn't shoot one of those guns because if you shot it back, one of your guys might shoot you thinking that you were the enemy. So the crisis was pretty intense. And nobody knows whether they're making the right decision at that time. For me, Company C commander had been shot in the back. One of my classmates, his lieutenant, was shot in the head, and I was on the back side of the LZ. So Colonel Moore said, "Lieutenant, I need you to take over Company C." And I said, "Well, I've been in combat now I've been in commissioned 7 months and 1 day, and I thought I'm now a company commander in combat in Vietnam." That's something that I never counted on. Part of that was when in the combat, we were no question we were going to be overrun. Everybody was going to be annihilated, and that was the purpose of the North Vietnamese. It was to do away with us, do away so that we couldn't get any helicopters on the LZ to bring ammunition. We couldn't bring our wounded out. So we had a whole half day in the morning of the 15th. And the only thing that happens there, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard the term, my battalion, the 2nd of the 7th, was waiting back at the airport to come in for reinforcements. And they couldn't come in because we were surrounded, and they would shoot the helicopters down fast as we'd come in. And so it was a windless opportunity to get with. The captain of Company C, my commander, he said, "Ranger, get over there." So I crossed the LZ, and I took 28 men with me. I did not have a casualty. I had some guys scared as hell, just like I was, but we got over there and we positioned ourselves to the next attack. The next attack that came was as bad as anything we had. We did not have a living lieutenant except myself that was still functional out there. We had all the replacements. We had sergeants running partial companies, and we decided, or we didn't decide, they decided for us. Colonel Moore looked around and he said, "This is what we have to call in the military broken arrow." I don't know if any of you know what broken arrow means. Those that know broken arrow, it's nothing a commander ever wants to do. That means we're going to call in all of the air power, all of the artillery that we can possibly call in on ourselves and our targets right in front of us. So within 15 minutes, we had Marines, Navy, Air Force jets coming in, A-1E Sky Raiders coming in, and just absolutely getting ready to blow us to hell. They did. They dropped their ordnance on us. It was on us as well as the enemy, and it was to stop us from being annihilated. And I asked myself, well, what's worse, being burned to death or being annihilated by the enemy? So I kept thinking, I'm going to, when the airplanes started coming in, I jumped out a foxhole, I covered myself up, and the napalm went off. Okay, when the napalm went off, the screaming and yelling was like nothing you can imagine. And it was horrific thinking, what is happening here, that we thought we were doing the right thing by coming into this area. They were convinced that they could beat us, and they were. Even though we had air power and we had artillery, they did not have either one, and they were still killing us about 3-1. And it was horrific, I can tell you that. So the all-day fighting, and after they came in and dropped the napalm and the fighter jets came in, we were watching the fighter jets. When they would come over the side of the mountain, you knew what their line of fire was. And it, in some cases, was us. That's sad as it could be, but that was war. That was what was happening. We had all day fighting, lots and lots of young soldiers burned from the napalm. A lot of them suffocating because they couldn't breathe, and we still didn't have water, and we didn't have ammunition. So you can imagine that my company, the 2nd of the 7th, my commander and my best friend, who was also the first lieutenant, came in, and he said they came in with one reinforcement group, and they said, "Where's your boy?" And my company commander said, the colonel told him, he said, "Look, he's done a hell of a job. Leave him alone and leave him in place. He's not going anywhere." And I was proud of that after the fact. But my guys hit the ground, and the 2nd of the 7th brought in companies, two platoons. Rick Rascola was one. I'll tell you a little bit about him later on. And when we got looking around, we couldn't move these wounded soldiers. That was the sad part. Guys were burned. The fellow that rode out on a helicopter with me when I was extracted, his boots were burned off. Now that breaks your heart. That's somebody's family. That's somebody that it wasn't one of mine. And I looked around and I did a quick check, and believe it or not, I had 3 casualties, no deaths. And I looked up and I said to the Lord, "Thank you, God. You saved me. You saved them." And my company commander said, "Leave him alone. Leave him in the company and let him run the company. He's done a hell of a job, and we'll do it." So we started with my new company. I was still attached to the 1st of the 7th. The 2nd of the 7th was fighting it off. The new boys were in town, and they were energetic because of all of us that looked and massacred, if you would. In that particular time, the fighting was subdued a little bit because the napalm had burned the enemy pretty bad. They were lying all over the ground, all over the place, and some of them were crawling around. And any of our boys that were crawling around that got anywhere, we were talking, when we say close combat, we were talking within 15 to 20 yards of each other. That's how close. You could see the eyes. You could see somebody else's face. You could see the agony that's going there. And it was not good at all. So between the blood, the guts, the burns, and the bruised and everything else going, strangely enough, the cabins backed off. They backed off, and we thought, what the heck is going on? No more. They had captured 4 of our own machine guns, and they had used all 4 of them on us. So you can see that the situation appeared to be rather dire. That went on, and that night, the night of the 15th, was not quite as bad as the night before. However, we had some more hand-to-hand fighting. They were coming in and getting our wounded boys and stabbing them and shooting them. And we were sitting there thinking, when is this coming to an end? When is it coming? Still, no water, no ammunition. I was shooting a pistol a Beretta that I took over. So when we got to the night of the 15th, we were pretty much at the mercy of whatever they did. They did not try to overrun us, and we were shocked, because all they would have had to do was just to crawl a couple 10, 15 yards, and they were in our backyard. So the 16th rolls around, and we had what we called a mop-up operation. We had a lot of North Vietnamese lying out in front of us. Most of them still alive. They did not take their casualties back. They waited till the fight was over, then they would go take them back. So on the 16th, Colonel Moore got a message that he was to round up his troops and be picked up by the extraction. Well, if you know anything or had any experience of war, you realize when you do a movie and you kind of embellish the scenes, that the actors can be prevalent in. That's not exactly how it happened. So the guys were there, and they came on the 1st of the 7th, and all the helicopters were able to get in. They were taking the wounded out, the burned out, the dead. They were taking those out, and at that time the total was almost 300 dead and about 250 wounded. And most of these kids were younger than I was, and I was 22. So you thought about that, and then the 2nd of the 7th, my unit, and they said, okay, we're going to get the 1st of the 7th out. That's my company commander said, do you want Lieutenant Lane to stay? And he said, damn right, I want him to stay. He said, he's done a heck of a job. So I prepared to stay, and we did a mop-up operation of our wounded. Well, while I was doing the mop-up operation, it was probably right around 1 o'clock. And right out of the clear blue, somebody started throwing hand grenades at us. And we're trying to figure out where in the hell are they coming from? They look like baseballs. And one of them landed in my CP, my command post. So my first sergeant, my first casualty, by the way, of the 2 days, and it killed my radio operator. So it blew my right hip and my boot off my right shoe and all down my right leg. So they said, hey, the Ranger's down, What do we do? And we said, look, Colonel Moore had already left with the 1 of the 7th. There were no helicopters to take any of us any further. And a general, whom we'll say his name was General Knowles. He was an assistant commander. General Knowles came in on his chopper, and it was safe to come in now because the fighting was over. And they put me on that chopper, wrapped me up in a poncho, and they put a young man from Puerto Rico in with me. Both of his legs had been burned off, and he was talking to me, and he said, what am I going to do, sir? And I said, you're going to be all right. Well, he died on the helicopter. And in Jason's slides, there's a comment there by General Knowles, and he said, this has been a harsh lesson. However, this is just what we need to season our boys. If I ever wanted to shoot somebody, he was in number 1. So I ended up going back and landing back after the mop-up. Well, we won't tell you the second part of the story because it's a whole new movie. But you have to realize something. The movie and the book were written about the 1st of the 7th. I was the 2nd of the 7th, and I was the only one that was there the whole battle. The only one. I lost 3 soldiers. I had 3 dead, and I had about 7 out of my 28 that were wounded. And I was proud of that record. So when I got back to the helicopter, they said, well, put the lieutenant on the general's helicopter. And I thought, I don't even want to ride with this son of a gun. I know he has a different attitude about what's just happened here for 3 days, and it bothered me. So when we got back to the LZ, and they said, Lieutenant, I was wrapped in a poncho. They said, going to send you back to Quinnon, which was the hospital. I think Jason may have a slide of that, and I'll tell you a funny little story about that. It's really neat. Think about it now. I had been in the Army since January of '94. I'd been to airborne school. I'd been to Ranger school. They tried to get me to go to jungle warfare, and I was never. You never go to war to get a medal. Nobody does. Our group on the first day of the 14th, we had 3 Medal of Honor winners. We had 2 Distinguished Cross members and 1 Silver Star. Now that is in 1 day of the first battle. And you went through that and you think, you know what? This is what war's about. This is what war's about. I'm spending 3 days of my life, still have not had water to drink or ammunition to shoot. And when I landed back at Quinnon, And you ladies, if there are any nurses in the group, you'll get a kick out of this. I had not seen a nice young lady since January of '94. I had been in schools and all kinds of programs. So I did not have much of a relationship. So when I got to Quinnon and I'm on the helicopter, they said, "Hey, we got the Ranger. We got the Ranger. You got to take care of it." So they unasked me from the helicopter. They took me in and they took back in, and hospital area was nothing but blood. Nothing but blood. I wasn't considered a critical kill. I was going to recover, but they said, "Look," they put me in there on a stretcher, and I think that an angel from the Lord showed up, and she said, "How you doing?" And I said, "Oh my God, this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life." And she said, "Oh, I'm going to take care of you." I said, "Oh, I like that even better." And bottom line, she said, "I'm going to cut your pants off." And I thought, "Oh, the big guy's looking after me, boy." What she did was she was cutting my fatigues and boots off so they could work on me. And that didn't last very long, but the ecstasy was wonderful to think about. And I thought, this idea that I have of what's happened in the Ia Drang. Well, I was flown out. I was flown out to Quinnon on the 16th. And there's nothing you do in war that you don't feel that you deserve these medals that they give out. I was very honored to receive a number of citations and awards. But I look back and I think, you know what? The blessing of me at that time was how few of my boys got killed. There were platoons that were wiped out. And I thought that this is sad. This is sad. So when I got back, and then they sent me back in, they said, "You're going to send you to Manila, and you're going to go through surgery, and then you're going to go through something." And they did. And I ended up in Okinawa, which was wonderful. I got my first good meal in about 5 days, and finally got some water. So I thought, well, that is what it is. So I'm going to make note of a couple of things here that you might find interesting. Just prior, and I tell this story to my friend, just prior to going into battle, I was parked out on a hill. I got picked because I was a ranger, and they said, "Oh yeah, send the ranger out." So I was on this hill, and one of my soldiers came running up the hill, and he said, Ranger," he says, "Hell, man, we're surrounded by Vietnamese." And I said, wait a minute. What? Tell me more. He said, "They're everywhere. They're on the hill. They're on the bottom. They're on the top." And I said, "Wait a minute, calm down." And my heart was pouncing out of my chest. And I said, "What? Tell me where we're going. Don't anybody shoot." And he said, "Okay." So everybody's word was the ranger said, "Don't shoot." We go down about 5 clicks just down the range, and there's a big old soldier. I mean, bad looking dude, special forces. And I told him, I said, "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Lane." He said, "Okay." I thought he not impressed. So anyway, he said to me, I said, "I think I've been dropped off in the wrong zone. I think I'm in Cambodia." And he said, "One of us is in the wrong zone, aren't they, Lieutenant?" And I said, "Yes, I understand." So he said, "I'll have you out of here in an hour. Pack up your boys and get right." This was just an opposite. So you know who that guy was? General Norm Schwarzkopf. He was a major. And he was a major. And the gist of that story that's kind of interesting, 30 years later in my life, I was working with disability for kids. And I ran into him. He was on the board of directors of a camp that I was at. And I walked up to him and I said, "Sir," I said, "I had an experience in Vietnam, and I think one of us wasn't there." He said, "Guess who that was, Lieutenant?" And I said, oh my God. And he and I became very close friends till he died. And he was the epitome of a soldier, a brave soldier. He liked his troops and they liked him. And I thought, you know what? If I ever grew to be that thing, my troops liked me and I liked them. So the bottom line was I came back to Fort Benning, and I'm wrapping this up and we're going to have our question and answer period. So what I did when I got back to Fort Benning, I signed in one day, and the very next day I got a call and they said, General Acuff wants to talk to you. And I thought, who's General Acuff? And they said, General Acuff was in your Ranger class. And I said, Ranger Acuff? Well, oldest man ever to graduate from Ranger school. And he said, I got a job for you. I said, well, I'd be honored, sir. He said, I want you to teach knife fighting and hand-to-hand combat for the Rangers. And I thought, I'm a second lieutenant. Can't he see that bar? And he said, no. He said, you're the man I want. And for 2.5 years, I taught for the Rangers. And I taught hand-to-hand combat. And I taught battle. And I got combatives. There were a lot of emotional times. I won't tell you that. But when I got ready to get out of the service, the CIA had told me they'd been after me for 5 years. I didn't know it. I didn't know what the CIA was. So they said, you know what? Now that you're back, and now that we know who you are, and the books came out and all of that kind of good stuff. And I said, that's fine. But you know what? I'm not going back in, because if I had gone back in, I would have been, they would have promoted me to captain in a heartbreak, and I would have been right back in Vietnam. So I decided to go back and promise my dad. I made my dad a vow that I would finish college. I'd be the only person in his entire family that finished college. It took me 10 years, but I did it. I did it. And I was proud I did it. So with all of those experiences, I just leave you with this. War's hell, and it doesn't matter who's commanding it. If you trust each other and if you live with your buddy next door, you can't explain, and God can't explain. You can be going into battle and somebody on your left gets a bullet in the head and somebody on your right. And you ask yourself, why not me? And that was my story. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have. So, Jason, are you there?
Yeah, I'll have to facilitate. I mean, certainly if you want to come into the center, it's kind of hard to see the camera. He can see that section of the room, but if anyone has questions, just relay them to me because the mic's here.
I'll handle any question politically or otherwise that I can answer legitimately. So I will tell you that Vietnam was under 5 different presidents, 10 years. And I was instrumental with the committee that built the wall. I've been to the wall 5 times, and I cry every time because there's names that I can just reach up there and touch. And that's my life. I'm here. They never enjoyed what I've had the pleasure of having. So question and answers, if you like.
Any questions? Will? Yes, sir. What's that? Well, you can address him. I don't know if unless you come up, he's not going to hear.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah, go back. Go back right there. You have to scoot down. Sorry.
No,
Here, let me.
just bend over so I can see your face. Okay, good. Yeah.
You're good. He can see you.
You're better off.
Don't let him tell you that.
Okay. Go ahead and ask your question. I'm not sure if you can
First
hear.
of all, thank you so much for coming here, for volunteering to talk to us. Thank you for serving. I'm sure you don't, or I'm glad you don't feel like it, but we consider you a hero and appreciate all you've done for this country.
Well, I appreciate that. And you know, I thank God for the experience, not for the losses, but I've had 50 years after that, and it's been wonderful.
What I wanted to ask you was, how accurate was the movie we were sold, and what are your emotions whenever you see that?
I'm glad you asked that. That's a question I get a lot. Okay. Part of it, you've heard my story, and my story is a true story. I am on the opening page of the book, and I never got credit for anything that I did in combat or lack of casualties in the book, because the book was written by the 1st of the 7th, by a general that wanted notoriety, by a correspondent that became a national vet. And you know what? I can only tell you the truth. I was there. So the book is okay. Anytime you take a book and have a movie, it's going to be a little bit glamorous. Mel Gibson was not quite that charismatic. And Sergeant Major Plumley, who Sam Elliott played, I have right here on my wall, I have their autograph on my poster. And, you know, I appreciate that, but that doesn't make it any better for the ones I lost. So another question?
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
When you were going into the LZs, what's the, I'm not quite sure how to ask it, but
No, ask a straight question.
one thought about, one, the major goal of the mission, and two, were the higher ups, the generals, the people that planned this expedition, were they aware of the existence of the NDA
No.
numbers?
No, we had search and destroy, which meant we landed on the ground and hoped we found something to go do it. And we had no idea what we were up against for 5 days. Unbelievable that intelligence would not know that. And when you start burying your friends and going through your catalog, you just know somebody didn't plan this that well. So,
Having seen the movie and read the book, I agree. But thank you for your service.
oh,
It's
my pleasure.
it's absolutely amazing that there were that many people that were able to come out.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's a shame. I'm very involved with veterans and very involved with support for veterans, and thinking that I was one of them that made it out. 17% of my OCS class were lieutenants that all died. And I look back and think, you know what? I went to my 50th reunion and I looked at guys that were still telling war stories, and I said, you know what? Don't tell me, I was there. So
Thank you.
appreciate it. Any other question?
How did they get,
Put your ugly face up there.
Sharon?
Yeah.
How did they get the, infrastructure? I mean, did they have other wars or other things going on that they had all these caves designed and ready to go when y'all came around?
They've been fighting the French for like 10 years.
Yeah.
That's what he talked about.
The Vietnamese kicked the French's butt. They got them in an ambush and annihilated. And that's the reason I use the term annihilated them. There was not a single survivor. And the French said, you can have this country. We don't need it.
It sounds like maybe the U.S. should have talked to the French a little.
Yeah. Well, there are more to Vietnam. I have studied Vietnam and I have lectured on Vietnam. There are many, many things and many, many accidents that were made. When General Hardin, who was the first general that I mentioned to you in the opening, General Hardin was a 3-star general, and he told Kennedy, he told Johnson, and he told McNamara, don't go to Vietnam. It's a war you can't win, and it's a guerrilla war, and we don't know how to do that. And then he replaced him with Westmoreland. So
Oh, we got another one.
I'm back up.
that's all right.
2 more questions. One, I thought it was very interesting when you said Colonel Moore met with the Vietnamese, I guess, colonel. How was their relationship? How did that go? Do you know? And then the second part, have you been back to Vietnam yourself?
Yes. I'll give you an opinion. It's mine. I think Hal was a good man. Hal was West Point 45. He was a lieutenant colonel when we went to Vietnam. He was a major general 6 years later. Somebody was going to shut him up because he knew all the intel and everything we had was garbage. They kicked us around like we were a football. And those guys that made it out and those guys that took a lot of punishment would look back and say, you know what? Was it worth it? No, not 10 years and 58,000 lives. And I'm one of them. So.
Did you have two questions, Will? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the first was, well, how was the relationship with Al Moore and the Vietnamese colonel, either whatever, when they met? And then have you been back?
That's interesting. I can tell you again an opinion. The Vietnamese, even the South Vietnamese, anticipated they had kicked our butt for 10 years. We were in 5 major battles. We didn't win a one. We took a lot of casualties. We had a lot of equipment. I never rode in a truck the entire time I was in Vietnam. I was always on a helicopter. I was on helicopters where the second in the seat was shot and killed, and one had to land. I mean, the experience that you have it's kind of frightening in one respect, but you also have to put it in perspective. You're a soldier. That's what they sent you to do, and you did it. So
Yeah. The second part of his question was, have you been back to Vietnam?
yes. I'm actually working with a group that goes and takes people back. We just took 8 nurses, the first 8 nurses that was served in Vietnam. The problem in Vietnam right now, it's all communists, and there is no reciprocity for anything. So you can't go back anymore. We're working on that, but my attitude was, why in the hell do I want to go back to a field where I almost got my tuchus laid off? So didn't want to do it. Sorry. Any other questions?
How were you treated when you got back?
I'm sorry.
How were you treated when you got back?
Well, because it was early in the war, I was treated all right as a lieutenant. My guys were not treated well. The ones that stayed and did full tours and that type of thing, not well. When I decided to get out and go to school, I went to school in New Orleans. I went to Catholic University, and I was right there the whole time, all the shouting and the rebellion and protesting. Most of the kids that were doing that are the people that didn't have a clue. They didn't have a clue what Vietnam was about. They didn't have a clue why they were doing it. They just know that it was not a popular thing. The news didn't help. I spent time with Morley Schaefer and Dan Rather doing an interview on me. And I said, you know what? Why couldn't you guys just tell the truth? They would sit back 10 miles behind a 1957 French tank and light a fire so that the fire would go up. I'm in Vietnam and I'm coming to you live tonight. Well, that's because somebody else wanted Walter Cronkite's job. So we didn't have much use for him, to be honest with you. We were trying to do a job as we were trained to do. And I'm proud of it. I have a son I'm very proud of. He went to military school. He did not have to go. He was past his age, and I'm glad for him that worked out. So if there are no more questions, I'd very much like and appreciate. Oh, yes.
Oh, wait, we have another question.
Have you seen the Ken Burns Vietnam series?
Have you seen the Ken Burns Vietnam series?
Yes. I read a lot of after action reports that I have access to.
But the Ken Burns Vietnam the 10 hours Vietnam.
I well aware of it, son.
Yeah.
I've got the books in the library, as they say. Yeah. There were 19 books written by my unit. 19 of guys in experience, some of them venting, some of them trying to get it off their chest, some of them trying to make amends with somebody. When you lose a best friend, and I did, I lost one. I was with him on Thursday. He was dead on Friday. And you ask yourself, what in the hell is going on? I keep his picture on my vanity, and whenever there's something in, I can look at it and thank you for what he did then. Not easy. That's all I can tell you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Hope I didn't offend anybody, but let me tell you, I'm not one to back off from being offended. I do a lot of work with veterans, and I see a lot of pain and a lot of, particularly our Vietnamers, because nobody can figure out why we were there. So, any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, son, for hosting.
I'm sorry, say again?
Dad doesn't walk real well right now, so
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much for being with us, and I'm going to go ahead and drop the meeting now. So thank you. And thank you, Vince, for helping facilitate. So,
You're welcome.
all right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
thank you. God bless.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of the story.